So welcome everyone to our second presentation of the day, and this presentation will be in English. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker. It's Dr. Pavlo Khudish, who is a historian. He is an associate professor at Uzhhorod National University, and there he teaches genocide history and the Holocaust history in Ukraine. Dr. Khudish's primary research interests are the modern history of Central and Eastern Europe, interethnic relations, and the Holocaust in Transcarpathia. In 2019, he was awarded a research grant for young scholars by the Moshe Miralashvili Center, Yad Vashem. And in 2019-2020, Dr. Khudish was a postdoctoral research fellow at the Jack, Joseph, and Morton Mendel Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. He's the author of publications on the history of the Holocaust and its aftermath in lots of different academic, including the Journal of Genocide Research, Holocaust and Modernity, and Acta Historica Neoscientia, and other journals. So we're delighted to have him speak today on the topic of post-war Transcarpathia, entangled social relations and conflicts of Jewish survivors with their neighbors. So Dr. Khudish, welcome, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for great presentations, for presenting me. And first of all, I would like to express my gratitude to the Indiana University and the Big Ten Academic Alliance for giving this opportunity to Ukrainian researchers in such tremendous times. Also, I would like to thank two people. My friends, Taras Haiduk and Mykola Hayavoy, those without whom I would not be able to continue my research and to share results of my research. Taras Haiduk was my very close friend, and he was killed in action in 2022 by Russian forces, and Mykola Hayavoy was my student from the first cohort and then became my friend, who died, who was killed in action a year ago by the Russian forces. They both were historians, and they both wrote researches and articles. So I would like to start my. I would like to start my presentation from one story that happened in January 1945 in the small mountain village of Rička in post-war Transcarpathia, which was called Subcarpathian Ruthenia when it was part of Czechoslovakia in the interwar period. And then it was annexed by the Soviet Union in June 1945. So local residents at the public meeting in January 1945 in this village decided to discuss their former Jewish neighbor Herman Simkovich. In 1941, 127 Jews had lived in Rička, which was about 12% of the population. In the same year, in August, part of the local Jewish community was deported to Kamenets-Podilsky and killed there. And in May 1944, the remaining Jews were deported to Auschwitz. The Red Army entered the village in October 1944, and 5 months later, villagers villagers formed the new pro-communist government immediately after the entrance of the Red Army, and then they gathered on a public meeting in January 45. The Ukrainians explained the reluctance to accept Herman Simkovich back as a resident with a simple statement: we cannot return the part of the meal to Herman Simkovich, and we cannot turn our village into Palestine, end of quote. Thanks to the documents held by the Arlsen archives, we know that Simkovich had been in the Mauthausen concentration camp at the time of the village's decision and was liberated from Günskirchen subcamp by American troops on the 5th of May 1945. So his Ukrainian neighbors tried to determine his post-war fate without knowing whether he had survived the Holocaust. Months later, the local pro-Soviet authorities in the neighboring village of Zolotarevo where about 5% of the Jewish population had lived before the Holocaust, issued an order, I quote, "Jews returning from concentration camps are not allowed to stay in the village for more than 3 hours," end of quote. This decree was revoked by a higher authority in April 1945 with an explanation to the village authorities, which stated, I quote, "all citizens are equal," end of quote. Though such decisions by the former neighbors of Jewish citizens had no legal basis, they do illustrate the relations between Jews and non-Jews in Transcarpathia after the Holocaust. The study of the experience of Jewish survivors and their interactions with new social political realities of Central and Eastern Europe, namely the emerging of communist regimes, has been the subject of numerous scholarly discussions in recent years. I will not stop, because of the lack of time, I will not stop in detail in historiography of the question in the detail, but I have to mention several books, several researchers, especially Christian Ionescu, the Romanian researcher who wrote recently published his book on restitution and relations between Jews and non-Jews in the post-war Romania, and Barbara Klatchman, who works in Scotland, who her research is focused on the also on the relations between Jews and Jewish survivors and non-Jews in Hungary, and specifically on microhistorical in the methodology of microhistory. Now, my research heeds the call of Katerina Chapkova and Kamel Kiek, who pointed the necessity of rethinking existing approaches to analyze the social history of survivors' lives and the relationship with former neighbors and local authorities at the micro level. So I explore the interactions and communications between Holocaust survivors who returned to Transcarpathia and their former neighbors and local authorities on this newly annexed periphery of the Soviet Union. This study focuses on lives of ordinary survivors and people at the bottom, because it's enable us to analyze the negotiations between heterogeneous Jewish communities or individuals at different level and different levels of state and local administrations. So all these contacts, interrelationships, conflicts in post-war Transcarpathia took place against the backdrop of Jewish attempts to recover property stolen from them during the Holocaust and return to normality. So in my research, I explore complex processes of the restitution of real estate and personal property as the comparative analysis of survivors' experiences in rural and urban areas. I focus not only on the interim authorities at different administrative levels who coordinated the restitution and integration of survivors, but mainly survivors themselves and their agency, their diverse agency. A little bit about my sources. They are predominantly from the state archives of the Transcarpathian region, which contains numerous documents on Jewish property created both by village and city authorities and by individuals. The few references to survivors in official sources of the time prompted me to take the approaches of social history from below to analyze the mechanism and scenarios of the confiscation and redistribution of property of Holocaust survivors who returned to Transcarpathia. Uh, the historical and ethnographic region of Transcarpathia was traditionally non-urban and economically underdeveloped, with the majority of the population, including Jews, living in rural areas. At the same time, large Jewish communities existed here in the pre-war years only in Mukachevo, which we know as Munkac, also a Hungarian name during the war, and a few other small towns. The Soviet annexation of the region put local Ukrainians at the top of the power ladder in 1944-46 for the first time in history. After gaining official power, Ukrainians began looting and redistributing Jewish property in autumn 1944, when it was still unknown which Jews would survive the Holocaust and return home. The survivors' former neighbors perceived the redistribution of Jewish property by the new communist government as a legitimate, understandable, and rational act. The Ukrainians gaining control over decision-making processes was a factor contributing to the transformation of their traditional indifference toward Jews into anti-Semitic administrative actions. Anti-Jewish resentment among Ukrainians in the quasi-state of Transcarpathian Ukraine manifested itself at the official level as the confiscation of Jewish real estate and other property. At the same time, the Soviet authoritarian centralization of power ensured that the destructive processes and conflicts in rural areas did not escalate into open confrontation and open violence. Instead, in the urban space, the agency of the first survivors who returned to the cities contributed to successful cases of restitution and integration. More than 100,000 Jewish women, men, and children of Transcarpathia were victims of the Holocaust between 1941 and 1944. According to rough estimates, the number of Jewish survivors were no more than 20,000. Not all of them returned to Transcarpathia. According to the 4 district social welfare departments, which I will mention later, also I'll tell more about them. They were part of the government and were responsible for all these districts of the region. So according to them, 13,717 Jewish survivors returned to Transcarpathia. So they had protocols where they put numbers. They were so they basically registered all the survivors who returned and who physically went to the institution where they have to register. Scholars make higher estimations of about 15,000 survivors returning to the region. The difference in estimates may be because, as I told, not all the survivors went to register themselves, and so some of them, as I saw in testimonies and memoirs, were several hours in Transcarpathia just to see their home and when went abroad. The historian Anya Khudish, in her dissertation, identifies three groups of survivors returning to Transcarpathia. The first group group returned in autumn and winter 1944, comprised Jews who had survived in hiding and returned with the Czechoslovak army. But the number was insignificant. The second larger group returned in winter and spring 1945, comprising survivors who had been liberated by the Red Army in Auschwitz and other concentration camps throughout Poland, and also Jews who had been in labor battalions of the Hungarian army. And the third largest group of survivors came back to Transcarpathia between May and early autumn 1945. These people liberated by the Western allies of the Red Army, Western allies and the Red Army in Germany, Austria, and other Central European countries. By the spring of 1946, about 85% of survivors emigrated abroad from Transcarpathia, and about 2,000 remained in the region. So my research is focused on this short period of time, about a year. After the Red Army entered the region, it was governed by a network of local national committees under the leadership of the National Council of Transcarpathia and Ukraine, which was a kind of parliament of this quasi-state. It consisted mainly of local communists and their sympathizers, and had supreme executive, legislative, and even judicial power for this transitional period from November 44 to June 45, and then formally for 7 months more from July 45 to January 46. When Transcarpathian Ukraine was officially incorporated into Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. So the National Council was under the direct control of the military and civilian authorities of the Soviet Union, but district, city, and village national committees existed at lower levels of government. So the military and bureaucratic systems of the Soviet Union exerted less pressure on these local authorities, especially from November 44 to the end of June 45, when it was officially signed a treaty between the USSR and Czechoslovakia on Transcarpathia. So it was officially treaty was signed, and then this transitional period ended. Moreover, in the first month after the Red Army's arrival, a Czechoslovak delegation was in the town of Khust, trying to restore Czechoslovak power in the region. But real power was in the hands of the Red Army, which controlled and appointed people to all levels of government. So these grassroots administrative structures were formed from local pro-Soviet individuals of various social strata, rural and urban intellectuals, workers, farmers, relatives of volunteers who joined the Red Army, and partisans. Village national committees began to form in late October and early November 1944, long before the most Holocaust survivors returned. Consequently, representatives of Jewish communities were unable to participate in the decision-making of these authorities and influence the fate of confiscated property. The town's national committees, however, consisted of people with administrative management experience or political backgrounds from the pre-war period. These authorities incorporated survivors who became active contributors to the post-war urban life in Transcarpathia. The national committees produced documents that reflected the position of the local population regarding the life of the settlements. Predominantly handwritten, they became the voice of the people and reflected conflicts between the Ukrainians who had gained power and the Jews who had returned from the concentration camps. These documents constitute the main source base for my research. Immediately after the expulsion of the Hungarian authorities from Transcarpathia, the provisional government began the process of nationalizing enterprises and property and implementing land reform. On the slide you can see the resolution, which was entitled "On Assistance to Victims of Nazi Terror." It was addressed to all district, city, and village committees. And it stated that houses confiscated from German invaders and traitors to the motherland, as well as houses. So people should be provided with houses whose owners were deported and whose whereabouts are now unknown. So obviously, by this category, the authorities meant Jewish property. So the pro-communist government fully legalized the confiscation and redistribution of Jewish property. This reflects the provincial government's effort to quickly win the favor of the Ukrainian population by redistributing Jewish property and land. That is why the process lacked a unified mechanism or system of implementation. But interesting fact that responsibility for the confiscation of Jewish property, for the state ownership and its subsequent redistribution was officially assigned to the lowest level of government, so village committees, who consisted of neighbors. So the final decisions regarding property left to Ukrainian, sometimes Romanian or Slovak neighbors in the villages, but mostly predominantly Ukrainian neighbors. This was also an attempt to legally stop the spontaneous looting of Jewish homes, which had begun immediately after the Red Army entered Transcarpathia. So urgent action was certainly needed to resolve the problem. In the autumn of 44, village committees began to set up commissions to examine the condition of Jewish property and to issue resolutions to demolish or sell houses to put an end to the looting. Members of such commissions were usually members of village authorities. So this led to considerable abuse of office and corruption. Property was sold at reduced prices or to certain close people. Villagers accused each other of looting Jewish property, and village committees confirmed the fact of looting. At the same time, the villagers usually did not perceive these acts as crimes, but as an avoidable reality. For example, you can see the quotation of Mikhailo Savko, the Ukrainian peasant who asked the house of Zelig Hershkovich, explaining that it's in the poor conditions and the houses are being looted every day, and he wants to have it so he can repair. So the village authorities, in the first months after they were created, acted in their own discretion when selling Jewish real estate. But the higher authorities began to react harshly to redistribution of Jewish property in early 45. In particular, the district committees. There were 12 district committees, pointed directly to the abuses committed by the village authorities and calling the sale of Jewish homes sometimes even a criminal offense. This was because the district committees were under the direct control of the higher authorities of the quasi-state, and thus under pressure from Communist Party officials from Moscow and Kiev, as well as from military and law enforcement agency. Although few members of such commissions, commissions for which were created to check the condition of Jewish property, sometimes were Jewish survivors who had returned to the villages. There was no actually official requirement that Jews must be included in commissions inspecting the houses. So it was instead an exception rather than a rule. And I was unable to encounter in sources only two such cases. So, for example, in the 30th of November 1944, at the meeting of a village committee in Lipcha, it was decided to create such a commission, and it consisted of 4 Ukrainians and a Jew, Herman Mayerovich. So the commission, which was actually the unique case, the commission, the committee, so local authority, village authority, decided that, I quote, people caught stealing Jewish property should be punished and or handed over the military prosecutor's office, end of quote. So the village authorities decided to create this document, so this decision, obviously, because Jewish survivor had been able to exert some influence on them, and thus his return became more visible to his former neighbors, and encouraged the people, the village authorities, not to ignore his presence and demands. So there were various scenarios of for a distribution of Jewish property. Because of the lack of coordination between the authorities. So residential buildings were given to non-Jewish peasants free of charge, sold at public auction, leased or sold or transferred by a Jewish owner to non-Jews free of charge. So the people who were given or bought Jewish houses were also of diverse social status. For example, you can see the list. There was on the previous slide the list of 62 private Jewish houses, and here on the slide you can see the various various scenarios. So and various social status of people who got the property. So the situation changed actually in late spring 45, and the village national committees began to provide homes, Jewish homes, first and foremost to the newly privileged social stratum of the society. At that time, volunteers of the Red Army or Czechoslovak Army, their families and partisans. So a large number of them were people with war wounds. So also much more often than leased properties were sold at the public auction. So that this phenomenon, controversial phenomenon, was not regulated by any law or government order, and had arisen solely from the experience of participating in similar auctions, in similar actions during the period of Czechoslovak and especially Hungarian times, immediately after the Holocaust. Part of the real estate and other property was sold on auction, to the Ukrainian population also. So Jewish survivors were not the silent victims of the confiscation and redistribution. So the first place when they returned, first place was their home. So, and it evoked many many traumatic. So it evoked a traumatic experience from the times of the deportation. From the times of the deportation. Also, it was not uncommon for survivors to find non-Jews already living in their homes. So Jews often describe the first encounter as hostile. Uh, so survivors recalled that their property, particularly furniture, had been looted directly by the immediate neighbors. There were also situations when non-Jewish servants who worked for Jews stole their property. Of course, these people knew the exact number of items and their value, as well as their location in the house. Usually, usually the attempts to resolve the property issues with non-Jews who occupied the house failed because of fear of violence. So survivors from rural areas wrote many complaints on their own or with help of lawyers. So initially, these petitions were forwarded to local, the lowest level of government, the village committees, and sometimes to the higher level, to the district committees. But because this level of government these authorities were responsible for distributing, they also mostly failed. There was a delay in processing applications which considerably worsened the situation, especially economic conditions of Jewish survivors in the villages. And this became an impetus for village Jews to move to the cities or immigrate, realizing the futility of restitution efforts. So one example, Tobias Grunberger from the village of Dubove returned from the camps in March 1945. He asked the village committee to return his land. He actually received it because it was before the sowing season, so before the period when the agricultural season started. But did not have time to farm it because he contracted typhus. In July 45, the village authorities sent new Ukrainian owners to Grunberger's field, along with the local militia, local police, who began mowing it. Grunberger and his lawyer, who was also a survivor, filed a lawsuit with the district prosecutor's office, claiming that this was not the first time the authorities had exceeded their authority. The district prosecutor's office responded by opening a criminal investigation and asking the district committee what it had done to restore Grunberger's legal rights. But because of these bureaucratic obstacles and documents going from the village to the center and back, the case was closed in early November 1945 because Grunberger had left the village crossing the border into Czechoslovakia. He then left for the American occupation zone in Germany and stayed at Poking displaced person camp before arriving in mandatory Palestine on a ship called the Transylvania in January 1948. In the middle of the summer, the tensions over restitution increased, and local authorities starting to demand demand the lowest level of governments to return property to survivors. And end of August, the district and village committees received an order from the prosecutor's office that the survivors' complaints should be considered no later than 48 hours after receipt, and they should act on it within a month. And of course, it was evident that the Jews had considerable agency in this matter. A large number of survivors appealed verbally and in writing to the authorities. The village national committees, which consisted of neighbors, were mostly unwilling to meet with the Jews, but the higher authorities and the justice system intervened in the Jews' favor. From mid-1945 onwards, the survivors' property began to be returned to them. But as I mentioned, it actually was it meant delay, considerable delay, and encounter bureaucratic obstacles. So briefly about the urban experience. So towns were safer and more anonymous for survivors than villages were. The consolidation efforts to protect their rights in Transcarpathian towns took on much more structured form than in the villages. Jewish subdivisions were created at municipal committees, which included leaders of Holocaust survivor communities. Thus, official Jewish representations in the administration helped to protect the economic interests of Holocaust survivors and to provide them with social assistance. For example, a Jewish social committee was established in Uzhhorod in the autumn of 1944 and was part of the official city's national committee. Another organization called Commission for the Protection of Jewish Rights was founded in Mukachevo. So the towns were important for Holocaust survivors because it was where they could usually receive social assistance. Jewish committees and later individual representatives of Jewish survivors worked closely with the International Committee of the Red Cross and the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, which we know as shortly JOINT. So the joint operated semi-legally on the territory of Transcarpathian Ukraine from May 1945 to the spring of 1946, which is perfectly described in a research of Michael Mitzel from Joint. He works in the Joint Archive. So in early summer 1945, the number of survivors needing food, clothing, medicine, and shelter increased rapidly to the extent that the provisional government was obliged to respond with the institutional act. So on the 4th of June 1945, the Department of Social Welfare of this provisional government issued an order to establish 4 separate social departments, welfare departments, to assist the returning survivors. The offices were established in Uzhhorod, Mukachevo, Khust, and Berehovo, so the cities, and they controlled all the districts of Transcarpathia. Their leaders and members were exclusively Jewish survivors. These departments were tasked with organizing and running soup kitchens, temporary shelters, and dormitories for survivors, providing with clothing and footwear, medicine, medical treatment, financial assistance, labor, and tools. And also you can see they produced documentations documentations with the numbers of Jewish survivors who returned to Transcarpathia. So also survivors in the towns were very successful in returning their businesses. So in November, 44 shops and businesses began to be handed back to Jewish survivors. Beginning in the beginning of winter, 5th of December 44, the National Council issued a decree stating that all shops and businesses whose owners remained in Transcarpathian Ukraine should be immediately reopened. So those that will not be reopened within 10 days would be confiscated by the state. So this meant, in fact, that all shops and businesses owned by Holocaust victims were to be nationalized. But thanks to the Jewish Social Committee in Uzhhorod, many businesses were returned to Jewish survivors, and even members of the Jewish Social Committee themselves, they were asking for Jewish businesses, and they got some of them were getting several businesses. So they had to sign. So here you can see, for instance, Stefan Sobel, the Jewish Holocaust survivor and a member of the Jewish Social Committee in Uzhhorod, he asked to manage the Kalkstein's Brothers fabric shop on the main street of Uzhhorod, and also he asked for the Ludwig Bichler's fabric shop on the other central street. So the members of the local city government, so city committee, they made their participants went to the store. So how it looked like. So they went to the stores. They were checking if the store was not looted. If goods are there. So in 11 cases, the stores were opened and there was nothing there. In the majority of cases, the stores were just closed. So that was also the case of the store of Eugen Weinberger, who was the only bicycle seller in pre-war Uzhhorod. So he survived the Holocaust, returned, asked to return his bicycle store, and he got it with bicycle. So the owner of the store during the war was Emmerich Materni, who was in the Hungarian army, according to the documents of that time. So the National Committee returned the shop to Weinberg. So to conclude, it was the diverse agency of the survivors that catalyzed the success of restitution and revitalization of Jewish life in the region. Nevertheless, this was possible primarily through the close interaction and cooperation of the Jews with local authorities at the highest levels, which allowed survivors to be visible and to fight for their rights while the Soviet regime was establishing itself in this newly annexed peripheral area. Thank you so much for giving me possibility to present, and I'm open to questions.
Thank you so much, Pavlo, for this really important and fascinating research and presentation. Colleagues, please contribute your commentary, your questions. Waiting for your feedback for Pavlo. Yes, Dr. Barnai, do you have a comment or question? Please go ahead. You're muted, I'm sorry.
Now you hear me.
Yes,
Yeah, sorry. Should I ask in Ukrainian or English, whatever?
English works.
Okay, up to you. So, First of all, thank you for your fascinating presentation about these issues. A very short question. Do you find any similarities or differences with other neighboring regions of Ukraine, or maybe not Ukraine, but in Czechoslovakia and Slovakian regions and Polish borderlands, Romanian, or in Lviv, Bukovina, and other places annexed to the Soviet Ukraine? Similar processes or different, and in what way? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this question. Yeah, actually, yes, I looked closely to the neighboring region, to the neighboring regions, and there were some similarities in the northern Transylvania, actually, but not completely similar. With some, there was some in Hungary. But then again, what I argue about this region, why the case study is Transcarpathia, because of this the establishing of this quasi-state. So, and this region wasn't part of, as Galicia wasn't part of the Soviet Union before. So the was in this interactions with of Holocaust survivors with the authorities, with local authorities. This probably is this kind of I don't know if you could say uniqueness or no, but also if we look closer to the people who governed this region in this short period, so they were mostly local, so they were mostly pro-communist, loyal to the communist. New communist government. They were mostly local, not like in let's say in Galicia or somewhere else. There are also probably some we can see similarities in Diana Dumitriu's research on Bessarabia. So, but then again. I focus on these relations between different level of governments and Jewish survivors. So I want actually to find some examples, maybe globally, like to see some kind of similarities, or I don't know, of the regions who were incorporated to the Soviet Union after the Second World War. But again, that would be not about the relations between survivors. Like I'm talking about Titeva, for instance, became part of the Soviet Union after the war. But about the forming of government, how it was, whether it included locals or how it worked, system. Thank you for clarity.
Thank you, Pavlo. There's a question in the chat that I'll go ahead and read out. It's from Raymond Arendt, and he asks, what lessons might this have for Ukrainians returning after the war to currently Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine who want their property returned, especially if their property is now occupied by Russian citizens coming from the Russian Federation as new colonizers? Very interesting question.
Yeah, thank you, Raymond, for this question. Well, what lessons might this have for Ukrainians? It's hard to do parallels, actually, because of the different historical conditions and different things. But well, kind of I have to probably think more about this question, because yeah, it's kind of hard to answer right now, especially while we are still at war, and we basically do not know how it would be finished. to be honest, we are not sure how we'll end it. And we all hope for the best. We still don't know, so I don't have a good answer for that. Sorry.
Excuse me, if I may, just one sentence. I think it's a common rule should be no beneficiary of occupation from occupation. If you benefit something from the occupation, whether you're Ukrainian citizen or colonizer,
Yeah.
till the end of colonization, and that's it.
Yeah, I agree.
If I may, I had I guess a related question, but more, Pavlo, in the historical context that you were speaking about. I hope this question doesn't sound too naive, but I'm very curious if any of the homes that you mentioned that were occupied by Ukrainians that had belonged to the Holocaust, I guess, victims and survivors. Are any of those homes still standing? Is there anything left of those places? And is there any kind of discussion, any kind of recognition of restitution and reconciliation at this point in time?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. That's a great question. As I think the majority of the houses stand, so they are present as well as public institutions, Jewish communal institutions, communal houses. So because the Transcarpathia, the region wasn't destroyed during the Second World War, so they are there. Well, I tried when I was a PhD student. I had one short project on short oral history project, and I tried to speak with Ukrainians who I definitely knew that they got the house. So in some particular villages, but they, of course, they refused. Mostly in most answers, they refused. They are living in Jewish houses, and then we don't have in Ukraine the law about the restitution of private property, real estate. Yeah, just about the I think we have the law about the religious institutions. So I mean the communal institutions which belongs to some religious communities. So that's why there are some property. There are synagogues like in Khudst that still belong to the Jewish community, and some other houses, but not the private property.
That's too bad. Thank you for that information.
Thank you for the question.
Sure. Sophia, Jack, please, you have a comment or question, feedback?
I have questions. So thank you so much, Pavlo, for your incredible research. And I mean, first question would be rather on, so you explored relation between Jewish survivors and authority, but there's also in your research, there's relations between people in the same villages. So you know the concept of neighbor very much. It get its many and strong lives publicly and conceptually. But do you how that concept worked for you, and if and what maybe are possibilities and shortcomings of this concept, because there is a recent critique that by anthropologists that I think it was article neighbor is an empty concept, and it's very so specifically about how you analyze bonds and whether living together creates bonds, right? And then how it influences the way people behave towards people when they're still there, and also to the things that they leave. So it's one question. Another question is, I mean, how you work with temporality and periodization, right? Because you have this specific case, and I don't know, conceptually. So this is for you like a transition period, and in between a post-Holocaust, post-war, not yet, and war. How to define this? This time, and probably connection. If to give temporal dimension to the notion of annexation, like, we have a legal international, but international law, it was annexation, right? But when it stops and how it becomes something else, integration, so what is happening? So annexation stays forever, or it moves to something else, and what concepts you're using what concepts your case needs. And so yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. I have some more, but that's we will have chances to talk, I guess.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sophia. I'm happy to see you today again. Yeah, because we had a meeting on Zoom today in the morning. So yeah, thank you for great questions, and they actually I started to rethink the concept of neighbors, and how to I don't know, not probably to avoid it, but I definitely want to rethink it. And what is also interesting, that I started to discuss it with that. Unfortunately, I forgot his last name, but he definitely has the French origin, the anthropologist from the US, who was here in Uzhhorod, actually, and I met him. He was on his vacations, like, something like that. So we talked to him, and he sent me his article, and then we discussed a little bit. So I have to rethink. I realized the limitations of the neighbors, but I wanted in that research to, in that basically article, I wanted to somehow focus that these people were literary neighbors. So they literally knew each other, and they were responsible for this for the redistribution. So they met again after the Holocaust. They probably met during it, because of the as we know from testimonies and memoirs and the ego documents, they were people were seeing each other during the deportation. But yes, I have to. I'm on my stage of writing a book about it, but and probably on this terminology, I have to be more precise and rethink it later. Also about the temporality, it's also the great question, and as I want to place the focus of my research on survivors and their agency. So, and to see through their lens. So what was that for them, and that's why I think that's very useful. Categorizing is not always very good, but that idea of Anja Quilic to show the different groups of survivors, how they were present in society. The small group in autumn, and then the bigger group, and then the biggest in the summer and autumn 45. So during this period. So I always try to this timeline, to focus to write about this timeline from the perspective of survivors themselves, and also the annexation, incorporation, liberation, and something else like this was a question recently, like a week ago. I had a presentation on the Summer School of Holocaust Studies in Uzhhorod, and I had a question about the liberation, which I also would which I also would be willing to use actually, but also on the perspective of the survivors. So for them, especially when I'm writing, I'm trying to write about the people in hiding, how they survived in the forests. So for them, it was the liberation of course they were describing it even in his perspective of sounds when they heard the artillery. They were describing that this sound is how the liberation sounds. So probably I will not also avoid this word, but I will explain it more detail. But this is actually a discussion in Ukrainian historiography, large discussion about the liberation, expulsion of Nazi invaders, or how to define this period. So yeah, thank you, Sophia, for your questions. Yeah, I'm not sure I answered for all of them, but we'll discuss it later. Maybe I'll be happy.
Thanks, Pavlo. I see that Yulia Kravchenko has her hand up, and then there's a question in the chat that I'll read out later. Go ahead, Yulia, please.
I have very short comment on Pavlo's presentation. Thank you very much for very interesting issue you raised in your presentation, and it made me thought about the Crimean Tatars property, which were appropriated, and a very traumatic experience in an independent time. And it is our very recent history. And really, Ukraine as a young state, didn't do anything for developing a law and instrument how to back for people their land, their houses. And if we, during these 30 years, developed such things, it will be more easier now for us in this new challenge on occupied Russia territory, so to work with this. But unfortunately, we didn't do this, and really people Crimean Tatars, they were in absolutely in dramatic situation and in injustice situation. Which is about this property issue. So it just makes me think deeper about this, your presentation. Thank you very much for this.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great comment. Yeah, and an analogy. It's like, yeah, thank you.
And I guess we're at time. So one final question here in the chat from Raymond. He asks, did you find any instances of Ukrainian neighbors holding or protecting Jewish property for possibly returning to Jewish neighbors?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, sure. It was. There were examples, especially in the urban space, in the urban areas, in towns, and the towns in Transcarpathia. They were in 1945 became like a space where furniture was moving constantly. So during several months, especially in the summer of 45, according to the documents I have, the survivors were asking the committee, the city committee, can I return the furniture, the wardrobe, anything else from that Ukrainian, and then the committee sent somebody to ask Ukrainian to sign, and then people were signing. Yes, I hold that furniture, that moving property. I hold it for the survival for that Jewish neighbor, and then they were moving, and what is also what is interesting that it wasn't allowed to move anything in the space. I mean, in the city without a permission from the local government. They had to have a permission even to get back their property. But yes, there were cases of and again this mostly for it worked mostly for the urban space, for the cities.
Well, thank you, Pavlo, so much for sharing this project with us. The research you're doing is so important, such a rich field of inquiry. Thanks to our colleagues for joining us to listen to the presentation. Pavlo, we wish you all the best with your book. And
Thank you so
I'm
much.
sure you'll be in dialogue with our colleagues here further. So congratulations on a really important project.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much, colleagues, for joining us this morning, this evening, depending on where you are, and look forward to being in communication with all of you. And we wish you peaceful skies.